You are listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Well, Canada's trade mission to India is garnering a lot of attention, positive attention, for the business and economic potential of fostering trade between the two countries, but also negative attention over issues of transnational aggression and a statement made by an unnamed government official. Canada's relationship with India has been improving since Prime Minister Carney invited Narendra Modi to Canada last May, invited to observe a gathering of the G7 in Kananaskis. But it was not that long ago when agents of India were accused by then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of killing a Canadian citizen, an allegation that was followed by the final report of the OG Commission, which concluded India is a source of foreign interference and its agents accused of targeting members of the Sikh Canadian community. But those concerns are apparently no longer concerns for Ottawa, as an unnamed senior official told reporters the government does not believe that India engages in that kind of meddling anymore. Well, with that, let's bring in the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Mia Rabson, the Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hello.
So, you know, it was an unnamed government official who made that conclusion, but there has been some pushback, including amongst Liberals. I'm going to begin here with Sukh Dhaliwal, a Liberal MP who went to social media. This is what he said. I firmly denounce remarks by a government official downplaying India's transnational repression. They contradict assessments from the NSIA, the RCMP, and CSIS. This matter must be addressed, and the individual's conduct and suitability for their role must be reviewed. You've all been working on this story. You've been reaching out to members, current, past members of Canada's intelligence community. What are they telling you about this assessment that was shared in this background briefing?
Well, first of all, this is a senior government official. We're not allowed to say so because we made an agreement that this person could brief us with anonymity. I question whether we should have done that now, but nonetheless, this is the agreement that journalists made. But it is a senior official, very trusted by the Prime Minister. And the fact that this person would make an incredulous statement like that has been astounding. Former members of CSIS, Jody Thomas, a former National Security Advisor, Liberal MPs, academics, anybody who has been involved in dealing with transnational repression and foreign interference in this country are just, their heads are shaking because it makes no sense. First of all, CSIS would never, ever say that anybody has stopped doing something, because you can never know when somebody's not going to do something. And to make a statement like that is so bold that all of a sudden India stopped doing this, I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. And there's nobody that takes this person seriously, except obviously the Prime Minister. They tried to do damage control on this, Michael. They sent out the Foreign Affairs Minister yesterday in a CBC interview, which is rather pathetic because she couldn't. She was repeating talking points, but she didn't disavow the official. She never said that he was right. And I guess it comes down to this: India's always said that these are lies, despite all the evidence about them. And so are we to believe that all of a sudden India says, yeah, it's all true, but we were just saying those lies for public, but don't worry, we're not going to do that anymore. None of this makes any sense. And what's going to be bad for the Prime Minister is he's going to meet reporters on Monday. Guess what all the questions are going to be?
Absolutely. Mia?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Canada has trouble making trips to India that don't go off the rails. And I think at this point, a trip that last week seemed to be set up to have maybe some positive outcomes. All of a sudden, once again, we're talking about the issue that Prime Minister Mark Carney did not want to have to talk to. He's been trying to set up for the last year, law enforcement discussions and dialogues so that they can try and deal with this issue on one hand and sort of keep the economic stuff separate, which already, there are those who criticize doing that, but he's been trying to sort of put those into compartments, and that just kind of has completely been upended for him. It is impossible to believe that India suddenly just said, yeah, we're not going to do that. 2 days before this official said this, the RCMP gave a duty to warn to yet another Sikh Canadian and sort of who's sort of an activist for separatism from India. It's hard to believe that 2 days before this duty to warn was given, and suddenly that's, again, not related to anything that's similar that's been going on for the last several years. Like, it's just kind of incredulous. And then the government kind of silent on it. I mean, public safety minister was asked about it yesterday. He didn't agree with him, but he also didn't say he was wrong. And same with the foreign affairs minister. Not agreeing, kind of trying to find ways to excuse what was said, but not saying he was wrong. And unless the Prime Minister comes out before Monday and gives a strong statement about what is going on, this is going to dog him for this entire trip.
Joël-Denis?
Well, this issue, I think, is sort of the first blunder on foreign affairs by the Carney government. The senior government official was talking for Mr. Carney, presenting the views of the government in front of reporters before he left for the trip. So it's true that Mr. Carney wants to turn the page on the issue of foreign meddling from India, try to start a new, reset the relationship. But the government official not only tried to turn a page, but tried to rip it up as this never existed. So it's a major blunder, and it still affects the diaspora community in Canada from India, which we all know from the Foreign Interference Commission are the first victims of foreign interference. So it's a major blunder. There's damage to be fixed by the Prime Minister on this issue, not only with the diaspora community, but also with his own people inside the government. When you speak for me, make sure you speak the right tone and the right way about the government.
I mean, as late as November, CSIS Director Dan Rogers, in a speech, annual speech, identified China and India as the main culprits in terms of transnational repression and foreign interference. So, in a few months' time, that has all suddenly gone away. None of this makes any sense. It's just, yes, it's a blunder, but like what? One former CSIS manager said, "Talk about naivety."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was also a cavalier way that it was provided, or the information was said. It was along the lines of, "Well, if we thought that was still happening, we probably wouldn't be going on this trip." Yeah. It was sort of not even taking it seriously in the answer to the questions, and worth noting, repeated multiple times, because I can tell you the reporters that were in that room, their jaws dropped when he said that.
Yeah. And all he had to do was simply say, we expect India to live up to its its promises that it won't interfere in Canadian affairs or be involved in that transnational repression. End of story, and we'd be on our way to watch
the same lines they've been giving for the last 6 months.
And the government will remain vigilant about foreign affairs, and that's it. You don't cause any stir before the Prime Minister heads to India.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, at the start of this month, we did have the National Security Advisor from India come to Ottawa, and that individual did have meetings with the Public Safety Minister as well as the Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor. And out of that, they talked about working together on issues of security, on working together on any questions. They didn't really say, not surprisingly, transnational aggression, but they were talking about security concerns that they would be working on together. I'm wondering if the way this official, behind closed doors and, as you say, unnamed, has undermined any confidence we could have in that process if what this demonstrates is a government willing to turn a blind eye for trade on any security concerns that existed just, 16 months ago.
Well, look, first of all, I applaud the process that they're doing. Absolutely, we need to be, our intelligence and law enforcement agencies need to be in regular communications with the Indians. Part of the problem that has happened over the last decade is that relationship was not there. And India felt very strongly that the Trudeau government was cozying up for domestic electoral purposes to the Sikh separatist movement in Canada, which is not as big at all, frankly, in Punjab. And I think, and because they're very nationalistic, I think they said, well, you know what, we're going to take this into our own hands. They've done it in Pakistan, they've done it in England, and they did it here because they killed a Canadian citizen, and the RCMP has alleged that they've been involved in other murders as well. So there's no excuse for that. But the fact that the Carney government is trying to open a dialogue to avoid these kind of transnational repressions in the future is a good thing.
and getting the cooperation of Indian law enforcement and India, because before Mark Carney took over, that was one of the big issues, is there was no cooperation. It was one of the reasons that led to the big sort of ousting of diplomats in 2024, is that we couldn't get any kind of cooperation. So to have that, a place for that dialogue to happen, to have that cooperation, to share information and evidence back and forth, did seem like a step forward. But it's doing that doesn't mean that it's not happening, and that's the message that was sent by this official.
And we know it in the United States.
Yeah.
A guy just pleaded guilty.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Joël-Denis, any thoughts on that?
No, I think my colleague said it all. I wanted to say so.
Okay, listen, as we, kind of watch that story, there is another story happening here. You mentioned this, actually it was off camera, but we were talking a little bit about the speech on Davos. We have to stop talking off camera. So the Davos speech, the Prime Minister talked about the importance of middle powers coming together. So here he is on this mission, going to India, then Australia, then Japan, all middle powers. How important is this trip on that level? Yes, there's an economic play to be had here, but what about the political play internationally for Mark Carney and for Canada as it looks to assert itself globally?
Well, look, the Prime Minister has made it very clear that we have to diversify away from the United States as much as we possibly can. India is the perfect place to be going. It is the world's most populous country now. Its growth, economic growth rates are really, I think are like 6 or 7, 8%.
Yeah.
It's very high.
Yeah.
And they're beginning to tear down very high barriers. So it's great for us to get into that market. And it is a democracy, despite what's going on with Prime Minister Modi. And it's a really smart move to get in there. And certainly the same thing with Japan. We have a great relationship with Japan. In fact, most of their car plants are in Canada. Mm-hmm. We have more Japanese car plants in Canada than American car plants, and Australia shares very much the same values that we do. So all of this is really smart play by the Prime Minister. We see him playing this in Europe and in Asia, and so I think that he's trying to do the most that he possibly can to diversify trade and to build relationships outside the United States. In fact, there were figures just released the other day that showed that the direct foreign investment in Canada has really shot up, which is the first time in more than a decade, I believe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mia, how important is this trip beyond the economics, would you say?
It's the first trip that he has had since he made that Davos speech, and so it's kind of a chance for him to put his money where his mouth is, so to speak. It's, India, it is not an economy we can ignore. We have a lot of ties between Canada and India, people-wise, education-wise. There's already a lot of those connections. So why not see what we can do to improve that relationship? It's worth noting that Canada's a little bit behind on some of that. Some of our other allies, not the United States meaning, but other allies are sort of ahead of us because of the issues we've had with India. But we absolutely need to sort of make sure that they are part of this conversation. Australia is not necessarily a big trading partner for us, but politically, they have a lot in common with Canada. I know that the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is quite tight with Mark Carney. They have a lot in common that way. So having those kinds of allies on the world stage absolutely is important. And Japan is another G7. It's the only G7 country, I think, at this point that Carney has not actually visited in the last year. So that is an important part of it. But he made some pretty strong statements in that speech in Davos, and I think, to quote one person we talked to this week, sort of Canada's having a moment in mostly in Asia, they were referring to, and so it's a chance for him to go and sort of prove to some of those people what he was talking about, what Canada's willing to do.
Joël-Denis?
The timing of that trip is very interesting. This week you had this speech on the State of the Nation in the United States. Mr. Trump did not mention Canada except to say that we had a great Canadian team, hockey team that faced the American teams. But other than that, so we were left alone in that speech. And we asked the Prime Minister whether they had listened to that speech from Mr. Trump, and he said no. So you pivot, and then you don't listen to that speech, and you pivot, and you go to try to find new markets. I find that very interesting, and it just shows that politically speaking, we're getting a lot more independent from the United States, not watching too much the circus in Washington and focusing on the real things for Canadians, which is trying to find new markets. And the reset with India is important because there's talk of a free trade agreement, and let's not forget that India concluded recently a free trade deal with the European Union and also with Mercosur. With the European Union also concluding a deal with Mercosur. So Canada is also following steps of European Union, which makes it, sort of the kind of part of the pact of middle powers trying to go around the United States, which has a very protectionist policies.
Yeah, I'm going to add 2 points to what you shared there. When it comes to India, it is the world's third largest in purchasing power of any country around the world. And I will also say that I was speaking to Veena Najibullah earlier this week with the Asia Pacific Foundation, and she just came back from a trip from the Indo-Pacific region, and she said post-Davos, countries that she's speaking to, they are all interested in speaking with Canada right now, so it creates a window of opportunity, which is why we're following this trade mission so closely.
Right? I mean, it's worth noting that those countries, just like Canada, are also trying to find a way away from the United States.
Exactly.
So just quickly on that one, you mentioned the speech from Davos. I think it's a moment for Mr. Carney to try to reap the benefits of that speech.
Yep.
That was so remarkable and remarked across the planet. So he's, I think, trying to reap the benefits, but the economic dividends of that political speech.
Okay. Speaking of political speeches, I also want to talk about the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, right now. See that segue?
Well done, well done.
Pierre Poilievre giving a speech this week to the Economic Club of Canada, an important speech because he was talking about his thoughts on the changing trade relationship with the United States, what he would do, how he thinks Canada should be reacting. Take a listen to a bit of the speech that was shared by Pierre Poilievre earlier this week.
Canada's prosperity and security are inseparable from a stable relationship with the United States. And that is why we should not declare a permanent rupture with our biggest customer and closest neighbor in favor of a strategic partnership for a new world order with Beijing.
So a bit of a different take from what we've heard from Prime Minister Carney. Yes, there were, if you listen to the full speech, discussions or critiques of Donald Trump, naming Donald Trump, but also a warning about being too dramatic against what Donald Trump is doing, warning against China. I'm wondering if that speech helped Mr. Poilievre anyway to recast himself, because here he is, appealing to a business crowd, dealing with the fact that not only is his popularity numbers up against Carney continues to trail by double digits, the latest polls say the party is now trailing by double digits of the Liberals, and he just had a floor crosser last week, who, by the way, Matt Genadou, is on that trip with the Prime Minister right now. So does this speech in any way help Poilievre with the general populace, help Poilievre with his own caucus right now?
Well, look, I think it's a speech that says, I'm growing up. And I'm not going to be the partisan little sniper anymore. But there are some problems with that speech. One is, I agree with him that we can't ignore the United States, obviously. I mean, we're not going to turn away from the United States. Most of our goods flow to the United States, and it will continue to do so. Even the Prime Minister has said that. But the same moment he was saying his trade representative was saying, no matter what, Canada's going to have to pay more tariffs. So it kind of the message didn't really flow very well. And when you look at some of the proposals he has, for example, he says let's have a energy and critical mineral stockpile. Well, we've got that stockpile. It's called a ring of fire. We don't have a road in there. And until we get road in there, we're not going to have any minerals developed. We've got stockpiles of critical minerals all over the country because we're not developing those mines. You're saying, you can get projects done in 6 months? That's impossible to get a project approved and shovels in the ground, particularly if it involves Indigenous people.
And two provinces.
And the provinces. That's just not going to happen. So there were a lot of things that sounded very good on paper, but when you start looking at each individual one, you begin to say, not so sure about this.
Yeah. Does it help the Conservative leader in any way, do you think, Mia?
I mean, I don't think it harms him necessarily, because I do think he does need to show a bit more of a statesmanship side, which he was doing. He's putting policy on the table. There were some interesting ideas in the speech, but a lot of them, I don't. To agree with Bob, are maybe things that he himself talked about not being able to control the United States, but a lot of what he wants to do would imagine that we can control the United States. You know, one of them was that we'll tell the United States that we won't import Chinese cars as long as they give us tariff-free access for cars made in Canada. That's not happening. It's just like that's not even close to something that the United States is open to right now. So it doesn't seem to be a realistic suggestion. And a lot of the policies that maybe were realistic are very reminiscent of the policies that Mark Carney is putting forward right now. In fact, some of the words in the speech, the whole opening of the speech about not being able to control the United States, is very similar to some of the wording that Mark Carney uses. And that is a difficult spot for Mr. Poilievre. He struggles to differentiate himself right now. And if you're putting forward similar policies and you're much less popular than the other person, you're just not in a good position. So I don't necessarily think it hurts him, because it's a good thing for him to actually try and do this, put policy on the table and to have the discussions, but I don't think it was not his Davos moment, if that's what we were looking for.
I think Mr. Poilievre should have made that speech a year ago. So to me, it's too late, because many of the comments that he made were already made by Mr. Carney. I'll give you a few examples. Maître chez nous, in French, masters in our own house. Mr. Carney's been saying that for a year. And the same thing, we have to focus on what we control and not what we cannot control. That's what Mr. Carney has been saying. And there was some exaggeration in my sense of what Mr. Carney is trying to do. He's not talking about a rupture with the United States, as Mr. Poilievre just said. He's talking about reducing our economic dependence towards an ally that is no longer reliable, which to me makes sense. And also, he's not talking, Mr. Carney, to get in bed with China. He's trying to open markets for farmers in China, for the canola namely. So to me, Mr. Poilievre was a bit at it again, sort of déformé the comments of what Mr. Carney really said. So at the end of the day, I don't think he's going to win, because I think with that speech, because I think he's already 2 steps behind Mr. Carney on many of those issues.
And any suggestion that Canada should do more to cozy with the United States, even if that's not the words he's using, that doesn't play well in Canada right now. And it's the lesson he didn't learn during the election last year. He has a member of his own caucus who is sort of who's cozy with the Trump administration. It's not actually helpful to him at all if any Canadian walks away from that speech thinking, wait, you want us to keep our ties with the United States as strong as they are? It's just, I don't think that that's helpful.
And trying to sign an auto pact with the United States, as he mentioned, we already have that.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be tariff-free, but the United States does not want a auto sector that is viable in Canada.
Yeah, well, we canceled the Chinese autos. It was Canada that canceled them because we were hoping that the Americans wouldn't screw us over on autos, and they've done that. So that's where we went and said, okay, you might as well let some of these cars back into the country.
And we paid a price because we were following the steps of the United States on canola. For a year, canola was banned basically in China. So I think it's about time we stop paying prices because of what we do at the request of the United States.
Which is, of course, exactly the situation Canada finds itself in. And by the by, it was a Conservative premier in Scott Moe that wanted those tariffs dropped in order to get canola back into
And
Chinese
he's with
markets.
the Prime Minister on this trip. They're kind of good buddies.
Yeah.
A new bromance in Canada.
Okay, listen, we're now going to switch our segment, and I don't know why it causes you such stress, but I think it's a lot of fun. Time now for our yays and our
He just likes stressing us out.
I do like stressing you out, and that's, a show of love. Bob?
Well, I'm going to say yay to Pierre Poilievre. After a year of criticizing Prime Minister Mark Carney for traveling all over the world, Mr. Poilievre is getting in an airplane and flying to Great Britain and Germany, and that's a good thing. We have a leader of the opposition who's never traveled abroad as the Prime Minister in waiting, basically, and he's going to go to Europe, Britain and Germany to meet people over there and learn something, which is a good thing.
Yep. Okay, a good thing? How about a nay?
A nay, I have to say nay to the senior government official who really, I think, caused a lot of damage to the Prime Minister, and we haven't seen the end of it.
Okay. Mia?
Yeah, so my yay, I was trying to focus on something that sort of brought us a little bit of hope and joy, because there's a lot of not that right now. And so there was a press conference, I think it might have even just been yesterday, I could be wrong about that, at the Canadian Museum for History, where they were unveiling a model dog sled that was being returned to the Métis people by the Vatican. It's a beautiful piece of art. I believe it's from the 1920s. And Victoria Pruden, who is the head of the Métis National Council, she said, and it was just a lovely quote, and I've been thinking about it all week. She said, "These are not artifacts in the Western sense. These are carriers of memory. They hold the imprint of the hands that made them and the communities who once knew them." And the idea that artifact, which is so lovely, is being returned. They are still trying to figure out which community it came from and where it should actually end up. But that it's going to be returned to the communities where it came from. It just it's a little bit of hope at the end of the week.
That is a beautiful statement. Thank you for sharing it. Now for your nay.
My nay is about Canada's relationship or assistance right now for Cuba. And my nay is for both the government and the Conservatives on this. The government finally came forward and announced $8 million in aid for Cuba. Cuba is in a terrible state right now. They've been cut off from oil due to policies with the United States. The suffering in Cuba is just immense right now. It's a country that we've had great partnerships with in the past. It took us a very long time to step up with any kind of aid. $8 million just does not seem like a lot of money. Mexico has already sent, I think, 3 naval ships with food aid. Canada is not even discussing whether or not we would help them get some oil, or work with the United States to allow them to have oil back. We're not even talking with our own airlines to make sure that they'll continue to fly in and out of Cuba, which they're not anymore, and there are foreign airlines that still are finding a way to do that. So the government's response to this has just not been good enough. And on the other hand, you had several Conservative MPs yesterday, Jamil Jivani, Melissa Lantsman, suggesting that this was a problem, that we shouldn't be giving this money to Cuba, or that somehow if we were giving them aid, we should only give it directly to the Cubans. And I suggested yesterday, well, since we're not giving it to the Cuban government, we're giving it to, I believe, the United Nations to distribute. Unless they want us to go and stand on street corners and hand out money individually to people, I don't know what they mean by let's give it directly to Cubans. So Cuba needs help right now. Canada needs to do more.
Okay, Joël-Denis?
Well, I'll give her my yay to her. Yays and nays are so good.
Yay to be a Rabson.
But my yays goes to Mark Carney, because he is working on provincial diplomacy in a way that I haven't seen for a while from a prime minister. Taking along Scott Moe again on a foreign trip to sell his province to India. Uranium is at play, and then he did that also when he went to China. I think it's a beautiful way to use provincial diplomacy at its best, and it brings, I think, the Federation together better, and it's working in favor of national unity. So my yay for Mr. Carney on that front. And my nay, just like Bob, goes to the senior government official who sort of was an agent disturber, I would say, for the Carney government for what he said, without being, named, obviously. But that is, something to watch next week. How the government, Mr. Carney particularly, will try to iron out that kind of problem that he's facing now with that comment.
Okay, I'm going to give a yay to the way you pronounce uranium. It sounds far more beautiful than the way you say it. Well, you'll have to tell me after how you do that. Okay, so from the yays and the nays, I should point out that there is a break week coming up, but still a look ahead. What are you looking forward towards?
Monday's news conference in India.
Yes.
When all the Canadian journalists will be lining up one after another, trying to get the Prime Minister to clarify whether he agrees with the senior official that India has given up its bad boy tactics in Canada.
That would be an interesting answer to be listening to. Mia?
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm looking towards, that press conference, or maybe even before that he will come out and actually make a statement. I mean, hope springs eternal.
Okay,
It's going to be the speech that Mr. Carney is supposed to make in front of the Australian Parliament. Will he take most of what he said at Davos again in Parliament, or will he bring a new flavor to it? We know that the Prime Minister of Australia distributed Mr. Carney's speech to his key ministers so that he can, have a good view of what Mr. Carney thinks. So that's, I think, will be something to watch next week, the speech from Mr. Carney in front of the Australian Parliament.
Okay, both good things to be watching out for. But that is the podcast of Bureau Chiefs. Thank you to Bob, Mia, and to Joël-Denis. Because the Parliament is on break next week, the podcast is also on break, but we're going to return after that. But for you, everyone listening on the podcast right now, thank you for listening to us. You've been listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC.